All right, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for today's Career Day event hosted by the U of SC Alumni Association and the U of SC Career Center. My name is Haven Spanier and I'm the Senior Director of Programming at the Alumni Association here. And it's my pleasure to get to introduce our host to you all today. Before we get started with that, Billy wants all of your questions today regarding his job and state government, what it's like to have a career in the government. So as you listen to his presentation, if you have any questions, we want you to type those either into the chat or the Q&A. Either one works great. If you aren't super familiar with Zoom, there's a panel across the bottom of your screen. There should be a chat button and a Q&A button on that panel. So either of those will work for submitting your questions today. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce our host. Billy Quinlan is a budget research analyst for the state of South Carolina's Executive Budget Office, where he is tasked with supporting the development and administration of the state's annual budget. Billy is a 2019 graduate of U of SC with a Master's of Public Administration. Prior to his time in Columbia, Billy attended East Tennessee State University in Johnson City, Tennessee, after growing up in New Jersey. Thanks so much for joining us, Billy. I know we're all looking forward to hearing from you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for the kind introduction, Haven, and welcome everyone. Excited to have you here today to talk about careers in state government, right? So we'll just get right into it. So to give a little bit of information about myself, I guess it's kind of redundant here having a headshot of me and you can see me up in the corner. But as Haven said, I'm currently a budget research analyst in South Carolina's Executive Budget Office. Don't worry, I'll get maybe too far in the weeds of what that entails in a little while. I am a South Carolina grad in 2019 with my Master of Public Administration. And if you're not familiar with what that degree is, it's an advanced degree that's meant to train administrators, staff, managers, and any kind of public-facing role, most commonly within the government, but there are some other areas you can work in that I'll give a mention to later on. While I was a student at USC, I was part of the Graduate Student Association, a graduate assistantship with USC Connect. It's now called the Center for Integrative and Experiential Learning with the GLD program. Had a lot of fun advising students there. And I did work full-time briefly after graduation in the Office of Student Conduct and Academic Integrity there. Before coming to Carolina, I was at East Tennessee State University, where I had a couple different internship and work roles. I worked with new student and family programs there with orientation and extended orientation. Spent a few years with a minor league baseball team there called the Johnson City Cardinals, and did an internship in a regional office for the now retired Senator Bob Corker from Tennessee. The reason I bring all those different very varied roles up is to kind of point to how a lot of those different things can point you towards government. There's not really one definitive path, but there are a lot of different ways to get there and make use of what you've done before in a government role. So to get started, I figured I'd bring in, I hope you all enjoy gifts because I had some free time while I was making this presentation and there were a few. So obviously, we know that government has multiple different levels, right? I'm not going to go in here and detail every single spot, but there's your federal government, your state government, your local governments, which can be your city, county, or other different special districts. But when you think of government too, there are also your nonprofit organizations that work closely with government, or NGOs, non-government organizations, could be trade associations or chambers of commerce. And the reason I point these out, these are the most common, I'll say 4 levels. 3 of them are within the government, 1 outside but adjacent to, that you most commonly find yourself working in if you pursued a full career in government. You could ping pong around these different levels. You can find yourself in one the entire time, but there are a few different playing fields that you can be on. Your experience is going to vary depending on where you're at. My current role is at the state level. I think, and this is my opinion, I think it gives you a good chance to see what goes on at these various different levels and with these different players across all of the government. But also, there's going to be a lot of variation from place to place, right? A local government, if you're working in the city of Columbia, that's going to be very different than your experience in, say, Nashville, Tennessee, right? Very different places, different jurisdictions. And I'm going to focus on state government here, but I'm happy to answer any questions you all have as we go. So please put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. And a disclaimer, I work for the state of South Carolina, but what I am sharing today, I'm not going to share any state secrets. These are just my thoughts on what would best suit my fellow Gamecocks for careers in government down the road. So don't go telling my boss I'd shared state secrets, because I don't have any to share with you, unfortunately. So let's get started with the state of South Carolina, right? I wouldn't be a true recipient of a Master of Public Administration if I didn't inundate you with organizational charts, right? So what you see on the right there is a general structure of the state of South Carolina. There are over 100 departments, divisions, agencies, offices, commissions, different entities that are part of the state government. And with that huge number, there's going to be a wide range of functions, right? The state will handle everything from agriculture to there's the housing authority, there's commerce, there's obviously a lot of focus on education in the state. So there are a lot of different things that go into the South Carolina government. Some things are more commonly thought of than others when you think about, what does government do? But there's a lot going on there, and not just to point to the sheer size of it, but the number of different functions and backgrounds you could have and still be part of the state government. And to give a point of reference, where I am, that orange chain you see down the middle, my department is in there. My office is located in the Department of Administration. It's considered a cabinet agency. The admin is part of the governor's cabinet. I'm not sure where we are in that chain, but we're somewhere in there. It's a very big chain. But I think it helps to break down who these different players are in the state. I'm not going to go through every single one of the 100 departments, divisions, but I'll show you where I'm coming from. My office is in the Department of Administration. My office is the Executive Budget Office. So admin, it was formed in 2015 under a restructuring act that moved around quite a few functions in the state, but admin handles a lot of different functions, from human resources for the state to the state fleet of vehicles, facilities, IT, and that's just within one department. But I'm coming to you from the Executive Budget Office perspective, where, obviously budget's in our name, right? We're handled with the oversight, the administration, support and development, research, all things related to the budget over the course of the year. So what I'm going to do is explain my role without giving you a lecture on every term, fund, give you a review of how to do fund accounting. I'm not going to do that today. If you want that, let me know, and we can set up another time to talk about it, but that's not what will be best for you all today. So to explain my current role, my title is Budget Research Analyst. There is a team in our office of 6 budget and research analysts, and we're each tasked with different portfolios, I guess would be the right word for it, of agencies across the state. So for example, my agencies right now, I'm in charge of education agencies. So this doesn't mean I manage all of these agencies' budgets, but I handle our office's functions that interface with their budget. So that's all of K-12, the State Department of Education, the public charter school district, the higher education system, so your technical colleges, the lottery distribution process, as well as the U of SC system. So it's a pretty big cross-section of different locations across the state that we interact with. But I'll get into what we do day to day with our assigned agencies. But the clearest way I could break it down for you all today was the 2 main functions that we have: the development of the budget and the administration of the budget. So if I get too technical, ask me questions. I'm still learning as I go day by day in this job. There's never 2 days the same when it comes to some of these processes. So if I use a term or some jargon, ask me to clarify. I don't mind. So to break out what each of these different components are, we'll talk about budget development first, right? Because you can't administer a budget without having a budget. So this is pretty consistent year to year in terms of what this cycle looks like. So we'll start with all of our state agencies they'll submit requests. Hey, what do we want in our budget next year? What new programs are we looking to implement? Do we need more staff in this area? Do we need to move things around in our budget to make it a more accurate picture of what we're actually trying to do and what our priorities are? So our office will collect all of the requests from across the state. So to explain what that volume of requests looks like, a very fun photo of two binders that defines careers in government is some binders. That collection of binders there is just the request that I received for the upcoming budget from just my education agencies. So there are 6 analysts. We all have binders like that. We get a lot of requests because there are a lot of different programs and needs across the state and a lot of different agencies looking to do great things. So we'll compile all of those requests. We publish everything online as well so the public can see it. But the next stage in the process, and this is usually happening in the middle of the fall, think football season time, right? We'll start working with the governor's office as they build their executive budget for the year. That's the first budget per se for each year in the state. So we'll facilitate hearings for the governor's staff, help them get the information that they need from agencies and the research and backup that they are looking for to make informed decisions of what they're going to recommend to be in the state's budget in the upcoming year. So that's going on all throughout October, November, December. When we get to January, usually pretty early in January, the governor will publish their executive budget and give a good detailed explanation of what the priorities are for the upcoming year. Obviously, all of this is within the constraints of what money is available across the state. So there are some tough decisions that have to get made at all of these stages to figure out what can or can't fit into the budget this year, what needs to be a priority down the road, how do we organize all of this information and all of these needs. So we're looking at January. Governor's budget has been published. It's out there for people to see. Then the House and Senate come into session, right? We're in this stage right now, going through February, March. The House and the Senate will each make their own versions of the budget. Now, while we're really involved in the governor's budget process, doing some of that firsthand research and helping provide some recommendations to the governor's staff even, because if one of my agencies has a very specific and detailed request, I have more interactions with that agency's staff and chief financial officer and their programs than maybe one of the governor's policy advisors does. So I'll be there to help them sort through that information. When we get to the House and the Senate stages, the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, they each have their own staffs. So they're the first point of contact that is there to do this research and provide this support to the legislators. We're still there to give some technical support to them, help them organize, when it comes down to administering the budget, where does this piece go and how does this affect this? Or give some insight to what the agency may have shared with us through the process as well. The 5th stage there is called conference. Sometimes the House and the Senate have different budget decisions. So they have to come together and come up with what will be the actual budget, right? There has to be some sort of consensus met. That's what the conference stage is. So we take the requests, the governor builds the executive budget, the House and Senate take up all of these requests, and they come together and come up with what will actually be the state's budget. And I brought a prop. So you see on the screen there, those 2 binders, that's all the requests for just education agencies over the course of a year, right? So one of the pieces of technical assistance we give is helping build the actual budget book, which is that big. It's some good fun light reading. I'd recommend it. All of it is numbers and tables. If you want a review of the State Appropriations Act, again, I'm not going to do that for you today because that's probably not what you're looking for. If you want that, let me know and I'd be happy to sit down with you. But we help give a lot of the technical support when it comes to actually building that budget book because we'll be the ones administering it throughout the course of the year. So that's the development of the budget. There's been a budget passed by the General Assembly. It's signed into law. That is the money that is going out to all the state agencies to do the great things they do. Well, now someone has to make sure all of the administrative functions of the budget are good, they're in order, everything is happening the way it's supposed to, right? That's part of where our office comes into play. So the vast majority of all of these state agencies and offices have a dedicated person on their staff who handles their budget, their finance, their accounting. But there are a lot of central functions that our office plays in the budget process. So we work really closely with our agency contacts to help them have the insight they need, the sometimes an interpretation on a policy that could implicate their budget. So we're interacting pretty regularly with agency directors and leadership and whatever their equivalent of a CFO is, to help make sure they have the information they need to both, maximize their budget, but also meet the expectations of, hey, when the General Assembly passed this bill, this is what this program was for. Let's make sure you're still in compliance with everything that you're looking to do and expected to do with state finances. We'll have some research projects from within our office and outside of the office at times if there are special issues coming up or specific pieces of legislation that are being proposed. If they need, another set of eyes on, what sort of implications could this have? What are some options on the table for us? So a lot of times we'll be involved in that. It gives a really good, fun deep dive opportunity if you want to become a subject expert in how this specific type of grant gets administered in other states. We're the office that you may come to for that. And the last piece there is to track spending. We do, we're not going in day to day and checking that invoices are, lining up exactly over the course of 12 months, but we will go in and monitor what agency spending looks like over time to make sure nobody's about to run a deficit or encountering any sort of revenue issues over the course of the year, to help give that extra sort of, that kind of check and balance kind of system. So there's a central place that the state has to help make sure that everything is in order in terms of the fiscal house of the state. So that goes on throughout the course of the year, all the way from the day after the budget is loaded into the state's accounting system till the day that the next budget gets in. So none of that goes away over the course of the year because, we need to make sure we're on top of it, especially when we get close to the end of the year. So let's talk COVID-19, right? I think everybody, whether you're a student, working in government already, working somewhere else, doing anything, you probably felt like the weekend during that very strange spot in the Super Bowl halftime show. Once the pandemic hit, things started to shut down. A lot changed really quickly. And the same was true at the state government level. So while we didn't have funhouse mirrors or a massive budget, we did have a lot of changes in our office and across the state. So a staple of the pandemic for just about everybody was that period of remote work. Some people are still doing, our dedicated work from home period wrapped up in September. But there have been a lot of changes since. We are back in the office in person with additional safety precautions and procedures, of course. We're not just going to run back in there. But we've really had to embrace a lot of technology. Just like if you're a student, you started taking virtual classes. Well, one big part of our job links closely with what's going on in the General Assembly. So all of the hearings and subcommittee sessions that would be had, a lot of them moved to virtual settings. A lot of them held on Microsoft Teams. Obviously, we had to keep up with our team of 6 analysts and our supervisors and directors. So, as a staff, we leaned into that as well, talking regularly because, one of the core functions of our office and my role is making sure our agencies are being accountable and transparent and compliant with what they are doing throughout the year. So we had to really do that with each other too, right? We had to keep in touch with each other as the process was going on. And we were all navigating a new work from home setting and trying to be understanding of what that transition looked like. Now, like I said, we're back in the office. The General Assembly is back in session. They're mostly in person, but now, they're streaming all of their meetings online for the most part. So, some of those things have changed. There are less days where we have to wear a suit and tie to go in and sit in on a budget hearing, maybe in the Senate office building, and we're just going to track it from our desk and make sure if any questions come up, we're able to give some backup after the fact if that happens. Now, I gave a very quick outline of what the budget timeline looked like as it was getting built throughout the year. We started working from home in March. So let's backtrack a year ago. we were right in the middle of the budget development process when, widely businesses across the state shut down, folks went home, stayed home and stayed safe. Well, that meant that the state budget process kind of paused as well. So the House and Senate came to an agreement last year for the state to operate under, starting to get technical. Sorry, I do this every day. I like it. Um, Under a continuing resolution. So basically, the state's budget that we're under right now is the same as it was last year. We didn't know what the outlook was going to look like. We didn't know what kind of shape the state was going to be in. Luckily, from a budget perspective, we've done fairly well. That's public information, not sharing state secrets. That's out there. But they did kind of take that pause and say, what, let's keep the status quo for a year and come back. And they're in the session right now building these budget books for the upcoming year with a whole new set of numbers and priorities, because a lot has changed since the pandemic came across our state. Now, during this time we were from home as well, as you all have likely kept up with for your personal knowledge, there's been a lot of federal legislation that's come down and had a lot of, it's included the stimulus bills, unemployment benefits. There were a lot of things in all these different bills, whether it was the CARES Act, the CRRSA, now the most recent one, the American Rescue Plan. All of these had portions of them that went to states, to state agencies, to our office to help try to sort out what are these priorities and how do we administer it. So that was a lot of, the team having to sort of circle the wagons over the summer and go through these massive policy documents and figure out, with sometimes, kind of fluid guidance because the process was moving so quick, what are the best ways to make sure we're, meeting what the purpose of this money was. If it was dedicated to go toward, public health initiatives, how do we make sure we get it out to those public health agencies quickly, in a manner that's still accountable in case, there's an audit down the road trying to figure out, did we actually use this money for what it was intended for? So there was a lot of, I don't want to say scrambling, but we were moving pretty quick over the course of the summer to make sure we were meeting those needs as quick as we could. And it was quite challenging. I'd say looking back, it was probably one of the most interesting times to be in an office like mine. I started just a few months before we started working from home, and we could see folks that have been engaged with the budget office and budget processes and other statewide roles for years. And we're all sitting in the same room trying to figure out these new issues and priorities and initiatives that our state is having to take on that maybe we hadn't planned for. We didn't really understand, we didn't have a playbook on, hey, how do we administer, millions of dollars of grants to XYZ groups in a really quick fashion. We didn't have a playbook on that. So there was a lot of opportunity to take that kind of deep dive into some new federal legislation, look at these state impacts and trying to make sure we're doing our best to work efficiently, but still meet the needs of the state and ultimately the people of South Carolina, because that's what all of this boiled down to. So obviously a lot has still changed because of COVID-19 in our work, but we are back in person and rocking and rolling. It's mid-budget process. It's a fun time to be in the budget office right now, if you ask me. But to wrap up my dissertation on all things budget work, right? I could probably go for a lot longer than you would care to listen for. But talking about government and you, right? But from a careers perspective, not just, how do you interact with the government and pay your taxes, right? So a couple of the points I want to drive home are that, in terms of educational backgrounds, training, past professional roles, it's pretty wide open in terms of what you could have done or what credentials you have to be able to take on a role in state government. Like I pointed out before, there are so many different agencies with all these wide-ranging functions. Even within them, there are a lot of different roles and capacities that you could fill. Looking at my office, we're a budget office. We have folks with accounting backgrounds, with backgrounds in social sciences, political science. A few people have the same degree as me, that Master of Public Administration. But even if you look at, let's take the Department of Transportation, for example. They're going to hire a lot of engineers to build roads, bridges, all the other things they have to build to get people to move around the state. They're also hiring accountants. You look at DHEC, Department of Health and Environmental Control, the main response agency to the pandemic and all things public health. They're going to hire a lot of people with biology and science backgrounds to be able to do this, different types of environmental testing or, epidemiology studies. Well, they're also going to have to hire a marketing coordinator. So there are a lot of different backgrounds you can come in with that give you a lot of flexibility between the different agencies around the state. One of the big distinctions I want to make, though, is at that second bullet point, looking at legislative versus administrative, right? Obviously, I'm on the administrative side of the state. I work in the Department of Administration. We have a lot of interaction with the legislative process just by the nature of our work being in the budget process. But I think that's a decent distinction to make at some point in your career. If you would like to focus on the administrative side, that's where I found myself. Where you're in some of those more central executive and administrative functions, right? Whether that's at an agency in particular or more statewide stuff, there's a lot of variation there. But when you think about a legislative career, those are the careers and positions that are going to be more linked to the political process, whether that is being on staff for, say, the Senate, the House, a governor, a different elected official. If that's from starting out and working in campaigns, obviously all these things are part of the government. That's going to be a pretty different experience, right? A legislative and political career may have, just inherently a little bit more risk because you're associated with the electoral process. But if your interest area is there's a ton of opportunity to get in there and work hard and have a lot of success over time. Another thing to think about is what level of government. It's hard to know for sure before you're in there what level you like. And like I alluded to earlier, you may say you work for the city of Columbia. You may work in the city of Columbia and absolutely love it, have a great time there. I know some people over there and they're fantastic. But then you're like, man, I love city government. Well, maybe you go to a different city somewhere else across the country or the Southeast, and it's a very different experience depending on what kind of programs they have, what the other factors in their state look like. Do the cities have a lot of control, a lot of jurisdiction, or is it mostly at the state level? So there's a little bit of a feeling out process for that part of it. But there are a lot of different resources to help you know what's out there. And, if you want to work in city government, inherently city governments generally, New York City's government staff is massive. City of Columbia's staff is not as big as the state of South Carolina staff. So there are going to be some more opportunities depending on the scope you're looking at. But I think in terms of getting started with a career in government, and again, I'm still pretty early on, so I'm happy to answer any questions you may have if you have something more specific or nuanced. Obviously there are your common posting places online, right? But the state obviously has their central job posting hub online. It's careers.sc.gov. I believe if you just Google South Carolina state government careers, it'll be the first thing that pops up. And they post everything from across the state. So it's not even that all these positions are just here in Columbia. There are offices all across the state, depending on what agency you're looking at. From a South Carolina perspective, if you're looking more at the local level, there are actually two good resources I would point you to. The Municipal Association of South Carolina and the South Carolina Association of Counties. They're both they're both associations that help represent and consolidate some of the efforts and resources for cities and counties. They both have job boards as well that, if you think you want to go that route, I'd encourage you to look there. And if you're thinking federal level, there's usajobs.gov that has all of the federal job postings for everything across the country and abroad. I will make a plug as a member of the staff of the Executive Budget Office. Just a few days ago, we posted an administrative coordinator position. If you're looking for a foot in the door, if you really want to work in the position is more administrative in nature in our office, that posting is up there on South Carolina Careers. So if that's something that would interest you, I would encourage you to take a look at it and see if that would be a good fit for you. If you have questions about the office as well, I'm happy to help you with that. And as part of the University of South Carolina community, would definitely recommend keeping an eye on Handshake. I know this is in partnership. We work with the Career Center a lot. That's a great tool there, and more generally, keep an eye on LinkedIn because so many things can pop up there in and outside of your network. I'm almost out of breath, but now would be a good time if we'll switch over to any questions that you all have. If there's anything I brought up that you want some more detail on, or anything in terms of, your thoughts on a career, like I said, I'm not necessarily an expert on all these things, but I can definitely give you my own insights from what I have done over time. But I guess I will turn it over to just a period for questions now. So go ahead, everybody, throw them in the Q&A or the chat.
Looks like we have a few questions coming through in the chat. So I will start with the first one. What made you interested in getting your MPA? And then kind of hand in hand with that, what made you interested in working in your current office and role?
Yeah, so we'll start with the MPA. I came out of East Tennessee State University having done a lot of different things. I worked in minor league baseball. I worked in student affairs at the university. I did that internship in Senator Corker's office. That was my first kind of step into anything governmental in nature. And I had a lot of really cool opportunities there. It was a regional office, so it was in Northeast Tennessee. Had a lot of cool opportunities there to interact with people who worked for these different counties and cities, and like the state's economic development office was in our area a lot during that time frame. And just being able to interact with all of those different players in the government, I guess, I realized that my interest really fell in that kind of public arena where you had a chance to make these different impacts, depending on what agency or office you're in. I wanted to be in that public setting to be able to do some of these honestly really cool programs that can change the way these massive changes occur across the state, whether it's a new business coming in or just the way that we help an agency operate. Now, in terms of my current office, so one of the photos I used was from Ben Wyatt in Parks and Rec. If you're familiar with the show, you know that he worked in a state budget office with Chris Traeger. I won't do a whole presentation on the show itself, but like Ben Wyatt, I find myself being kind of a nerd sometimes. And being in a budget office, once I read more about the position description, being at that cross section between the administrative parts of a budget and tracking, how it gets administered throughout the year and keeping up with how our agencies are functioning. When you get to couple that with some of the more legislative pieces where the budget is getting developed, it seemed like a really cool place to be that was really central to one of the core functions of a state or anything. Everybody needs a budget. So it gave a really cool jumping off point where I've had a chance to learn a lot about agencies I'm not even assigned to just by being in the room during these budget hearings and processes. So really the functions of the role interested me, but also the fact that the office was so core to what the state did drew me to it.
Great, thank you. Our next question: what skills or subjects from your grad school program are the most useful in your current role or in careers in government in general?
All right. So yeah, I'm having to think back a little bit here. There are two that kind of stick out to me offhand immediately. With the Master of Public Administration program at USC, it's meant to be, the common term for it, it's a generalist degree. So it'll give you, a little bit of knowledge in a lot of different areas that interface with the government. So the two that come up most in my current job, one of them is, public policy process. That's like your ramped up version of Schoolhouse Rock, where you learn how a bill becomes law, how it's more in depth than that too. You learn some more nuanced ways to evaluate a policy and think about the legislative language and how that would play out over time. So there's that public policy process. They really gave you an alliteration in that class for the title. There's that class. Something that I think is, I use it some in my current job, and I see it a lot across the state. It's something that's, bound to be a priority, whether you're working for South Carolina or really anywhere else. There's a course in public data analysis where you get a little bit of a tutorial on how to do statistical analysis. Not from I'm going to sit here and crunch every number and come up with a new theory for whatever, but a way to come up with some quantitative measures of, performance, or hey, if I compare X and Y, which is operating better if you look at it from what perspective. There's a lot of interest in the government field in general in how you measure performance, manage performance, and link up those kind of pieces to make sure things are running efficiently. And data is central to that. So getting a little bit of that statistical knowledge, you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to be, a mathematician, but having a little bit of knowledge in that arena would be really beneficial regardless of what role you have.
All right, the next question, and you mentioned this a little bit in your presentation about the different types of government between state and local and federal. How easy is it for people if they wanted to move back and forth between those types?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so and that's something that I haven't personally encountered yet. I've only been at the state level, but there are people in my office who have worked for counties and cities before. There are definitely opportunities out there because a lot of those skills that you're using and developing, if you're at a state agency or office, or if you look at my office, we're working in a budget office. Well, every county and city, they're going to have finance staff and budget directors and people who need to put that together at that level. So I think if you're in a position where you're looking at moving between levels of government, or say you start out at one level, and like I said, it's a feeling out process. If you're like, maybe I want to move to a different location, there are a lot of ways to transfer your skills over because it's all intended, it's all public. So there's always that component to it that you're working for the public. And a lot of those skills can be transferred over pretty well if you stay in your functional area, I guess.
Good to know that people have options.
Of course.
So the next question, let me pull the chat back up. It closed on. How often do you interact directly with elected officials?
Okay. Yeah. So directly with elected officials in my role, not as much. Now, some of my supervisors and our director do from time to time if needs come up. But in my role, I'm actually working pretty closely with their staff. So the House and the Senate make their own versions of the budget, then come together. The committees that handle the budget functions, House Ways and Means and Senate Finance, they each have their own teams that almost kind of mirror our group of analysts. So the education analysts over at Ways and Means and Senate Finance, I think we're starting to recognize each other's phone numbers, even if we don't have caller ID. We're on the phone a lot to make sure we're all on the same page of what our agencies and institutions are asking for, what they're looking to do, how they're functioning, because there are things that we get to support each other a lot on throughout the process. So directly with elected officials, not as much in my current role. That's something that would come with time and advancement. But you still have a really close touch point with the legislative process because their staff are extremely involved in all things that their elected officials are doing.
So besides your office and the elected officials, what other offices work on the State House grounds?
Okay, yeah. Well, there's a lot over there. So I'm not going to break out the campus map, I guess. Obviously, there's the State House where the elected officials do their business. So the House and the Senate and their staff are all on property. Our office is there. But there are also there are some central state functions that are there, like the state treasurer, the controller general. But there are also some agencies that have offices there. I know in our building, PRT, Parks, Recreation, and Tourism are in there. The Secretary of State's office, the admin law court is over there. There are a lot of different things. There are more things on the State House grounds than just the pure legislative things that are there. And there are a lot of agencies too that have offices. I talk about how they're spread across the state sometimes, but Columbia is the capital of the state. So even if it's not on the State House grounds, most agencies will have an office somewhere around the area here for their central functions, I guess.
All right, it looks like this is the last question, unless anyone else has a burning question, they can type that in quickly to the chat or the Q&A. But what is your favorite part of your job?
Ooh, that's a good one. I should have seen that one coming, to be honest with you. So I really enjoy, and this is more for what I've gotten out of my job over the last year plus. I like being in a position that's kind of central to state operations. I get to learn a lot, and I don't say that from like I get to know what everybody's doing, and I just know more than other people, but it gives me a chance to develop a little bit of like a fuller understanding of what's going on at the state. Even if you just take my core of agencies I'm assigned, there's a lot going on there in education, right? It's all the schools, all the colleges, all the technical schools. But even just looking from there, I get to learn a lot about, what these different institutions specialize in, what their priorities are, what they're looking to grow, and some of those regional aspects too, right? Coastal Carolina is going to have different priorities than USC Aiken just based on their location. One is going to focus on marine science sometimes. The other is trying to build a cybersecurity plan. So it is really interesting part of this is from my policy and government nerd, I'm self-admitted nerd side, where it is interesting to learn about what those different functions and priorities and options are across the whole state. That's something that I think is pretty unique to my role.
Great. Well, it looks like that was the last question. So thank you so much, Billy, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's Career Day event. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We'll be sending out a recording if there's anything else that you want to go back and hear more about, as well as a survey. We also have lots more upcoming events on our events page, ufscalumni.org/events. But thank you all for joining us today. And thanks again, Billy, for your presentation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody.